local storage every time they change, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make a function that does this. So I'm going to make a method in here called save that does this. So save, what's it got to do? Store the flicks array in local storage. So first we need to stringify it, right? JSON.stringify this.flicks. Why not? And local storage set item, I'll call it flicks. And it'll be this stringified array. That's it. Let's just make sure we call it at all the appropriate times. So we're going to want to call it in handle submit, right? So as soon as we push it on there, as soon as we push it onto the array, I'll just call this.save. When we remove a flick, we need to do it. Update storage. This.save. Anytime my favorite one. That ought to do it. Does it work? Enter flick, Thor, which Chris, Hemsworth. There it is. And remember, you can look at local storage in this application tab if you want to. There's flick. Here's the value. Yeah, it looks like it's there. Cool. Or we could just check with get item. If I favored it, did it change? Get item flicks. No, I don't know. Didn't I call it flicks? Flick. Whoops. Let's change that. Flicks. Let's try this again. Thor. Chris Hems. There you go. Favorite false. Let's favorite it. Favorite true. Delete it. Empty array. Go us. Yeah.
Why did we do the stringify? Did it differently?
A stringified array looks a little closer to this than the other. Did JSON parse actually work on that?
No, I did local storage that set item flick and then brackets name and then flick Chris like brackets. Like did it that way.
So if I didn't stringify it,
I just wondering what that is.
it changed it to JSON, which means we can parse it later. If we try to set it, well, it doesn't do it automatically. We did it, right? We're the ones who said JSON stringify. So let's try this again. Thor, Chris H. Not meals, flicks. I get object.
So where else did you put the save function?
Hang on a second. Let's put stringify back in here. I put it in handle submit when we actually push it onto the array. After I push it onto the array, I need to save it. After I remove one, I need to save it. So at the end of remove flick and at the end of toggle favorite. So anytime we do anything that actually changes the array, which is 3 places. Yeah.
That will only save the last input, right?
What's that?
So every time you like enter a new input, it will replace the old one that's stored in local storage.
It'll replace the entire array with the new entire array. But the array should include both things. So I put Infinity War, Hemsworth, Evans, Pratt. Yeah, because I didn't refresh after changing it back to stringify. See what you made me do, conboy. That's all right. Thor, Chris H, Jurassic World, Pratt. See, they're both there. Here's Thor. Here's Jurassic World. So we're saving the entire array each time. And that is how you dissolve a body in acid.
That's the first thing that came to your mind.
Right, leave it there.
It's harder than it looks on TV.
Did you watch Breaking Bad?
Yeah. So anyway, so let's say it's not like it was my idea.
You just thought a lot about it.
Yeah, I've just put it into practice many times. So anyway, so now we've saved it in local storage, but we haven't read it back out, right? So let's do it. So how about we make another one called load? So what's it going to do? Local storage get item, right? Local storage dot get item flicks. And then that is still going to be a string, so we need to parse it this time to turn it back into an actual object. JSON.parse. And I can save that, call that const flicks. So that's what I've gotten out of local storage. So then, maybe I can just say this dot flicks equals that. It's not going to change the display, right? But it'll change my array. Let's make sure then we load first thing. Or almost first thing anyway. When should we do this? Should do it after we initialize it. So this dot load. Refresh. Let's look at my array. App.flicks. Yeah, there we go. Now, of course, if I start adding again, well, let's see. Guardians, Pratt. Still has 3 in it. Only one of them's on the page. If I refresh again, all 3 of them are still in the array. So we just have to keep our UI in sync with our data, but our data is persisting, by golly. What if there were nothing in local storage, though? Refresh. Let's try to add one. Explode. Cannot read property push of null. So when I say this.flicks.push, this.flicks is null because when I loaded it out of local storage, there was nothing there, right? So that's a problem. So one way we could deal with this, ever used that trick before? So it turns out OR doesn't actually return true or false. It returns the first true thing that it comes to. So if flicks is something truthy, it just returns flicks. If it's not, and it never even bothers to check the right side of the OR. But if flicks is falsy, like null, then it'll check the right side, and then we get empty array, which is true. So we return empty array. So that should keep this from exploding. So nothing in local storage. It doesn't explode. And I've got that there. And I've got it in local storage. Okay, so we're getting there. Now we just needed to actually show it on the page, right? So we've loaded it from local storage, but we're not showing it on the page yet. So what we need to do is an awful lot of what we're doing in handle submit, right? So in handle submit, we deal with the actual form. This is dealing with the form. This is dealing with the form. All this other stuff, this is what we need to do to each one. Seems to me. So the whole reason I named this handle submit instead of add flick is because now I want to write one called add flick. That will just take the flick as an argument. And it's going to do all this stuff. It's going to push it onto the array. It's going to save. And it's going to actually render the item and append it to the list. So then down here, all I need is this dot add flick. Flick. You get that? So what I've done is just refactor handle submit, which now truly just deals with the form. It gets the data out of the form. It doesn't need to know what's involved in adding a flick. It just calls add flick. Then it resets the form and refocuses the first input. So now that I have add flick that does all this stuff, what I can do in load, instead of this, seems like if flicks is an array that I just loaded out of local storage, what if I just call add flick on every item in the array? This sounds familiar. Run the same function on every item in an array. For each. Flicks dot for each. This dot add flick. Excuse me? Flicks, thank you. Flicks for each, this add flick. It's already a function that just takes a flick as an argument. And for each is going to pass in each item in the array as the argument to the function. Let's refresh. Oh, explode. Canary property flicks of undefined on line 115. Line 115. So 115, that's add flick. It says property flicks of undefined. So this is undefined. Why? We're not the ones who called add flick, are we? For each called add flick for us. And for each doesn't set this to a gosh darn thing. How do we overcome this? Arrow function, right? There you go. Just throw an arrow function in there and have the arrow function call add flick. So the arrow function now will receive flick as its argument. And so it needs to pass it on. And as I mentioned briefly earlier, that's an awful lot of parentheses. If you only have one argument to an arrow function, you don't actually need the parentheses. You can do it like this. Very common way to see something like for each or map written. So for each flick, call this add flick with that flick. Refresh the page. Thor. Captain America. The First Avenger. Katfa with Evans. Thor Ragnarok. Hemsworth. Great movie. It's a favorite. Jurassic World. Pratt. You know what? All the Thor movies are good. Refresh. Okay, I get them back. And I bet my array shows that it's a favorite, but we didn't update the UI with that, right? No big deal. No big deal. So in add flick, when we first add it to the page, we need to check. So we've got the item here. Let's see. I'll just say add to the down here. So I make my list item, and then I'll just check if flick.favorite. I'll put a comment in here. Mark it as a favorite if applicable. if flick.favorite, item dot class list add fave. Don't need to do anything too clever. I'll just add that thing if it's a favorite. Refresh. I got my faves back. Delete some stuff. Refresh. Changes. Change my favorites. Refresh. It's all saved. My data doesn't go away when I refresh the page now. If I delete all of them, refresh, nothing explodes. If I try adding one, it doesn't explode. Go us. We just made our data persist and cross page loads.
So JSON is the only way to do that?
With local storage, yeah, you're gonna have to somehow make your data into a string, because a string is all that local storage can handle. If we had a database that we were syncing with, JSON is the most common way of doing that, but there are a lot of functions that'll sort of do that automatically. So, persist, flick data, and local storage. That's a good word, persist. Questions about that? It's good stuff.